Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Galactic Family Podcast. This is going to be a special edition. What happens, and I want to welcome you actually, welcome you to the Sticco-Morgan Summit. What happens when a Cold War interstellar blueprint meets a 21st century scientist decoding the hidden physics of reality? In this exclusive episode, Gene Sticco, creator and author of the Engineering Infinity documents, joins Dr. Andrew Morgan to compare Soviet-era propulsion archives with modern breakthroughs in space-time, resonance, and advanced technology. Are these recovered files the roadmap to humanity's interstellar future? Did both the East and the West uncover the same hidden truth? Get ready for gravity bending concepts, consciousness linked physics, and a mind expanding look at technology that may already exist in the shadows. Welcome to the Interstellar Age. Pull everybody up here on the screen. Got my co host, George.
Hello.
We've got Dr. Andrew Morgan.
Hello, everyone.
And we've got the wonderful retired Gene Sticco.
Yeah, I don't know how retired I am, but thank you. If this is retirement, I'm keeping awfully busy.
Yeah. So, real quick, let's get right into this. So, Gene,
Yes.
what part of your father-in-law's documents struck you as impossible at the first look, and what convinced you that it was real?
So, the first of all, thank you for putting this together, Dr. Morgan. I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to sort of bounce things off of you. I have been flying by the seat of my pants, literally trying to figure things out and put things together. So, for me, this is really a sense check on whether or not, I'm mental as I'm the conclusions that I'm drawing, but hopefully, learn some things. So I'm very excited about this.
Sure.
From day one, from the moment we opened these and started thumbing through them, in the minute or two before we got to the drawings of the UFO, just looking at the physics and everything that was on the papers. I mean, it was just, bizarre. It was just overwhelming. It was, written in Russian. My wife's been trilingual actually her whole life, Lithuanian or Latvian, English and Russian. And, she didn't even have the vocabulary to be able to explain, a lot of what we were looking at. And, what motivated was the few people who we did come in contact with who did have some sort of background in physics or mathematics, aviation, particularly, who looked at it and recognized some of the physics, and again, none of them saw the whole thing together, because, again, I didn't want to scare anybody off with it, talking about it being some kind of UFO thing. But, they would say, oh, yeah, these are some older concepts, blah, blah, blah. So, again, that time frame, the 80s, 90s, they was looking at. And since just publishing them, and, Dr. Morgan, for your benefit, we finally just got to the point we couldn't get any help. We couldn't find anyone that, I could buy dinner, breakfast, or a cup of coffee for to answer the question, is this a family curiosity or is this something else? My own background in Intel, as I was researching, extracting what I could and began looking at the patterns, told me there was something to it, told me it was adjacent to a lot of declassified programs and things that I was seeing. And so that's why I finally said, you know what, I'm just going to put it out there and leave it to the universe and hope some good people like all of you came along, who's taken interest in it and say, all right, here's what we can decipher from it, and help draw those conclusions.
Ooh, George, you want to take the next one?
Okay, yeah, Gene. It's to have speaking myself as an armchair enthusiast, not really being a full-on scientist, and having, like, I can obviously, when we spoke to you, Gene, we were looking into the story of how the documents got in your hands, leading up to Engineering Infinity and so on. And then prior to that, we had Dr. Morgan on to explain to us some of the research he's been doing into these craft. Dr. Morgan, I'm going to avoid using warp drive. I'm going to avoid using anti-grav. I'm not sure what the nomenclature is or what syntax to use, but yeah, I mean, coming from a science point of view, looking at the equations. I'm only a very, very, I guess an undergraduate or even like a secondary school level at equations, maybe a little bit of fractional quadratic, but obviously things get very complicated very quickly. And if you're not in that field, from Gene's point of view, he's like, okay, one, it's in Russian, two, there's some science going on here, or it looks like science. Can we verify that? Have you managed to have a scan through and have a look?
Yeah, we're going to have an interesting. We're going to have an interesting
reaction as well too.
So what I did was I've done a bit of work on this. And I've got it here in front of me. What I did was my whole portfolio of work. I got my AI model go to scan all the work we've done, and then scan that document and do a compare and contrast. So in front of me here, I have a bunch of papers with all the summary information of that in layman's terms, in as easily understandable English as you can, that does a compare and contrast between the two pieces of work, basically. So as we're talking and going through the conversation, I can pull from that various things that come up, and I've even got a structure to it too. I've got comparisons across fields and space-time, then propulsion mechanisms, then craft architecture, then control and navigation, then consciousness and civilization, and engineering philosophy last. And so just to kick it off, some key statements. I worked with my AI model for this. So the Engineering Infinity document, if you want an overarching statement, it's a craft that's designed using physics that we currently understand, that's supercharged around electromagnetics and fusion power, versus Energyscape's portfolio, which studies UAP behavior to try and discover how they operate by tuning into the hidden layers of reality. So one's very much driven by known physics, one's looking at extending those physics. So we've got an industrial reverse engineering design through Engineering Infinity versus a operating system approach that my small team has been looking at. So that's where the bridge is between. And I've got some very interesting things to discuss about that whole, how that all works across the two models.
Wow, cool. Yeah, definitely. And I expect along the way, Gene's going to have questions for you, and you'll have questions for Gene, hopefully, as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, Jason, should we
yeah, we'll just keep it moving, man. This is awesome, man. We got the brightest minds in the room. So let's so before we dive into the technicals, here's a question for both of you, and then we can go into section 2, George. Before we dive into technicals, do either of you, now we'll start with Dr. Morgan, do either of you believe the public is ready for what these documents imply? I'll
go first. I think yes. This whole thing's accelerating so quickly now through the United States and globally, and people are starting to ask questions. If everyone's saying this is real, like I said in recent podcasts, and how does this all work? And what have we built them, or why haven't we built them? What's going on? Is there another intelligence involved? I think people are at the precipice now and with the likes of us and many others starting to come forward and say there's something to all this, we're missing something here, or something's happened and it's been taken offline, but everything is coalescing together now at the right moment for a sensible response from humanity rather than panic in trying to understand all this. So I think, yes, we're at the precipice now of wanting to know what this is all about and the science of it all. And the key is the science of it all, I think, very quickly. So, Engineering Infinity is looking at a very physical, industrial approach to, and I hate to use this word, anti-gravity, because I've explained that before, through fusion reactors and electromagnetism to push a structure through a medium in space. And I want to talk about that more later. And then work like what our small team is doing is that we're saying, well, for interstellar travel, you don't push through space, you tune into different layers of it rather than use thrust or brute force. So there's a combination of things going on there with technology applications that we're going to discuss through this interview, which will be really interesting.
Awesome. Gene.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Dr. Morgan. And, just to expand upon it, my drive in doing this was simply the idea that as I began looking at it, I saw everybody asking these questions, right? Has the government done this? Do they pose a threat? Trying to explain all the phenomenon. And a lot of the conclusions I kept coming to was essentially, comparing these things against the documents and in a sense saying, well, it seems like these people are right in the things that they're talking about, but maybe they're right for the wrong reasons. If we, took the body of work as a source of truth, let's say. And when I began making these comparisons and seeing that, certainly compartmentalized across the spectrum of government programs, there were fingerprints, let's say, as I call them, there were the fingerprints of this science throughout all of these programs in such, packaged in such a way that to me would indicate they did a similar interest or we did a similar process, which if my father-in-law got it from reverse engineering a craft, where did we get it from? And then I also looked at it from the defense side of it. So if we know what this thing is, have there been things developed that could defend or counter this type of technology? And I found those as well. And the reason I did that was to simply try and answer the question, are they viewed as a threat? Or are they, truly viewed as an unknown phenomenon, or is it some combination thereof? And so that's the thrust of my work, is in trying to make those connections and then decipher what it means, all the while pushing the message to Congress. If you want to ask questions, this now provides better questions that you can ask.
Awesome.
Yeah, Sam.
We can skip around on the questions, George, because I know a couple of them we've already asked in previous podcasts. So.
Yeah, it's I'll be skipping around, but I think Dr. Andrew's got a fair amount of correlation between his personal AI model there. I want to ditch some of the questions we've got pre-generated, cut straight into it. So it's like, I think kind of just my view is similar to Gene's, that the fingerprints of the government are all over this, but coming from a pure science point of view, pure science, like would you say that the documents that you've read, Dr. Morgan, from Gene's Engineering Infinity blueprint, they are scientific? There's no question.
Because if I summarize that document with what I've got in front of me, so bear with me here. So the core theory in that document from the work I pulled together is that the universe operates on two opposing forces in Engineering Infinity. So you've got gravity pulling and you've got a charge pushing. And the charge pushing goes back to mathematical derivatives, back to Maxwellian electrodynamics. The interesting difference is it's the standard electrodynamics versus my team's work with extended electrodynamics.
Right.
So some interesting differences there. And the core theory with the document is that time itself speeds up or slows down depending on those two forces. That space is not empty; it's filled with tiny. This is from the document. Engineering Infinity. So space isn't empty, it's filled with tiny particles that act like a fluid. They used to call it the ether back then, but that's not really a appropriate word. You could think of it more as a four-dimensional space of geometric potentials if you want to be scientific and Maxwellian focused. Power sources focused on fusion. Now, I know at the moment technology is still finding it hard to stabilize fusion. So in terms of a scalable engineered solution, there's some interesting discussions there to have about it's still combustion-based reaction craft versus what we're doing. Propulsion-wise, the power source and propulsion-wise is electromagnetic coils or solenoids around the disk to push against space-time or the substance of space itself to generate your lift, your movement, and these so-called anti-gravity effects. And I don't like using it. It's more field-coupled effects. So let's not use anti-gravity. Shape-wise, you're still talking about a heavy metallic saucer because there's quite a lot of weight in all of that with solenoids and fusion reactors and layers and core containment field material that's going to hold that higher temperature reaction. So, and then your electromagnetic cores around the hull. So yes, high acceleration, and some interesting conversations about whether that's an inertialess drive, because in the document it refers to a constant 10G of acceleration. Now, in terms of human tolerance, that's questionable. They still say instant direction changes and hovering. Now, I've got some issues there about how can you have instant direction changes if you've still got a Newtonian-based reaction engine in a device that looks like a UFO. So there was some dichotomies there about the mechanics and engineering versus what it says it can do around all that. So that's the core of that whole document, and that's kind of what it focused on. I think there's a few discrepancies there about whether that would be an interstellar vehicle versus what we're proposing. Because if you remember a series like The Expanse or the series The Expanse, which talked about turn and burn, because the vehicles in there were constant acceleration vehicles that then slowed with fusion reactors, and to slow down they'd flip and burn to decelerate, which means you're still at a G-force. Now, if you're talking about inertialess drives, that all disappears because you're in a bubble that negates all of that. And what I found interesting in your document was they were overcoming inertia in terms of vertical aerodynamics, hovering, but horizontal thrust was still a fusion reaction driven internally. That's a continuous acceleration at 10 Gs. Human tolerance is pretty limited if you've got an operator. Payloads maybe not so much, but as an interplanetary vehicle, that's very much aligned with some of the concepts coming out now from research institutes about nuclear-driven propulsion for interplanetary travel. So whether or not the document refers to an interstellar vehicle, I'd say is up for question. But in terms of interplanetary exploration, and I don't think the shape matters so much with that design, because you're not superluminal and you're not driven by what we're talking about with scalar field coupling. You're still EM coupling and a thrust-driven propulsion system at a very high speed. So you're talking weeks across the solar system rather than years. So that's where that whole document sits, I think, and I've got some good contrasts with what we're doing to discuss as well.
Awesome.
So if I can ask, one of the, so obviously I try to always go back to the period in which they were written. And so, we have some Russian speaking folks with more scientific backgrounds who are working on tightening up the translations. We've had a lot of debates whether something's a 3 or whether something is a, Cyrillic letter. And, I've also comparing what's in there to what we know now. I've also always wondered, in some of this, is the language that he chooses the language scientifically he had available to him at the time, where some of these concepts might not have been as mature or been early on? Because I've noticed that a lot. It seems like, oh, he's talking about this, he must really be talking about that,
Yeah.
which has certainly, formed since just even since the 90s. Did you recognize anything like that?
Yeah, well, with getting this AI analysis done, and with the background I have now, I did notice that. I definitely noticed that, because when terms like anti-gravity fall out of the document, and it's Cold War era, right? So you're right, the vocabulary is underdeveloped because they don't understand what they're looking at, but they're trying to design an engineering solution for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it read, because that's I say, it always read like he's trying to explain it to somebody else. And and there's some other linguistic things in there where he refers later around the consciousness issues. He refers to other documents he had submitted to the Duma, so see author's other work to Duma, during a time period. So yeah, that was something I've always struggled with, was, well, it seems like he's trying to use language he might not have himself to explain to somebody else.
Well, there's two things. There's two key things. There's two key things in the document, guys, because one, he's trying to explain it within the confines of known physics, which is obvious from the summary I've got. And two, the vocabulary is dependent on their understanding of what they know they don't know at the time. So the term anti-gravity is, oh, look, it's hovering. It's overcoming gravity. It must be some sort of anti-gravity device. So that's the terminology of the era, which then becomes a pop culture term, and then it's misinterpreted and misrepresented until we get the vocabulary to understand the science and then connect that with technology and engineering. So yeah, totally, I can see that in the summary here when terms like ether come up and anti-gravity come up. That was the words that were thrown around at the time. Due to a lack of understanding.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now, Dr. Andrew, on the screen. It says specifically this TNS reaction produces mass from a massless electron positron substance ether. Yeah.
Yeah, so exactly. So and that's when see, it's only recently that it's become more public knowledge that Maxwell's equations as represented now aren't his original work, because they were modified. So back then, none the wiser. So four scale geometric potentials and lattice or space time, all that sort of vocabulary that's come on board now. That's not necessarily back then. They had Einstein's general relativity to work with, and they had the vacuum of space, all right, but they didn't have resonance. They didn't have scalar fields or harmonics or even extended electrodynamics. So or chiral phonons that we talk about, all this terminology, or porphyrin membranes. So they have absolutely no idea what the hell we were talking about back then with making craft. So they're going with, okay, this is what we have now in engineering and physics. How do we put that? How do we design a craft to represent what UFOs are doing? And I can see that in the document. And yes, some of the terminology is a bit esoteric, but that's due to a lack of vocabulary to explain what they're trying to do. And that's where the confusion comes in with interstellar versus interplanetary versus orbital engineering designs, I think, in a big way.
Okay, yeah. I think just to come in on that, the documents that were passed to Gene are real, okay, but the detail within them is attempting to explain potentially a real UAP that they've got, which they're back engineering. Or the other alternative in my mind, and I may be wrong here, is they've got an actual UAP and they're designing their own one, or attempting to explain it in such a way that they can create, as you say, Dr. Morgan, an interplanetary craft as opposed to interstellar. So in my mind, is it feasible that Gene's father-in-law was back engineering a recovered UFO and was attempting to explain through that back engineering in the language of the 70s and 80s scientific community in Russia, a recovered UAP from those secret areas, the Russian Area 51. I think in my mind, that's kind of how I'm lining these things up. So it's like, the documents in Engineering Infinity are not a complete blueprint of fully what, like step 1, assemble A to B, step 2, B to C. It's not like a model kit. part of the puzzle. And I think kind of in my mind, I have Gene's father-in-law saying he's going plumb, being a plumber or engineer, engineer plumber, and going out, getting his sandwiches, and then going off to the site of work. And then they open the hangar, and there's a craft that they've recovered, maybe partially damaged, maybe fully worked. Just to one side is they're going, okay, well, we've got this section. How do you think that works? Well, maybe we've been looking at this wrong. And they're using terms like the ether or layered space and these kind of things. And then obviously these documents have arrived, and you put it through the AI system to kind of compare and like look at the language. So that's kind of where I am at the moment with this kind of story, is that absolutely valid documentation from Gene's father, but maybe detailing. I don't want to say reproduction vehicle. I don't think that's the case. I think
George Wivy, I mean, I have friends, and they ask the question, well, could it be just based off of photographs, right? Is there any evidence he was actually hands-on and things like that? There's no indication. So, I tend to, again, I tend to lean away from that because of some of the specificity of measurements, but that's not to say those weren't, provided as well.
There's two things going on there in the Cold War era with this document, because at the same time, and I brought this up before, you've got Victor Schauberger's implosion drive disk research, and that story, which I have a copy of, Burial of Living, what's it called, Burial of Living Science, whatever it's called, the story behind him in Nazi Germany and what happened after World War II. And so that's an implosion drive and a disk. Then you've got Otis Carr's work, which has some similarities to the design in this book in terms of solenoids and how that works inside the craft too, and that's co-occurring with the period through which this document was written. So there's some invention there, and whether this document has got hold of or observed or seen some of that work, we don't know, and whether all of these works, those two authors and this document, have had access to, like you said, a recovered craft, gone, okay, we don't know how it works, but here's how we think it works, and this is what we'll put inside it. It looks the same on the outside, but we'll put our own drive inside it. And that kind of goes with some of these observations now about disks that seem to melt metal, are highly radioactive, and seem to drip molten metal and leave signatures of high radiation behind them, and perhaps that's an human engineered attempt to do exactly what you're talking about here that hasn't worked very well. Because if you put you're talking about, I've got it here, you're talking about an internal field driven reaction drive in this document, which is a thermonuclear reactor inside a disk surrounded by solenoids. So if something goes wrong, without a decent containment field, the whole thing is going to have a meltdown, or just because of such high temperatures in there in terms of a containment field. I know it talks about ferrous alloys or compounds as a containment field for the vortex that generates the plasma at that temperature to run a fusion drive to provide the power system to do this. So I would say that if, like you said, if they've recovered a craft, they've got absolutely no idea how it's drawing power. And if you go by what they say now about the inside of these crafts, there's nothing much in them, which is where our work comes in. That's because they draw energy externally. You don't have to put a reactor inside it. But you could have both, because if you drop out of, for lack of a better term, hyperspace, so you're hovering around in a planetary environment, you can't sort of flick on your interstellar drive because it's not much use hovering around a planet. So you need another power source when you're not coupled with that field, and that's where this nuclear core comes in to supply the energy field to still sort of navigate planetary space wherever you are. So I can see a whole lot of things have come into this. It's inconclusive whether they had a recovered craft, but if you had no idea what a disk was and you saw a disk and then you go and design a drive to put inside a disk and it's not an airplane, then where did they get the idea to use a disk or a saucer from? Was there a downed craft that was a saucer? But then you go, okay, if this is a private sector company that did that, or a civilian, then was that recovered saucer engineered by us or by another intelligence? So we don't know. We're speculating here. All we know is they've tried to put known physics inside a disk at the time to make it do what they've observed these disks do, and with a lack of vocabulary to explain it as well. And the engineering designs make sense in a number of different ways, but from what I've seen with the analysis is that there are limitations or some misinterpretations of what its capacity and capability is if it was proven to be operable.
Okay, I got a question there with for Gene actually. Did he leave any notes behind explaining why he believed that water played an important role in this?
Everything we have is in that book. So
Okay,
there was, like I said, we didn't look at them until after he had died. So we never got a chance to be like, what the hell is this all about? And, what's going on? So that's what we have. Certainly the Thread 3 documents that came out, after the last hearing, appear to be aligned, point to point when it comes to the program that the Russians were putting together. So much of this looks to be the point-to-point answer to the orders that came out for what they were investigating and trying to put their arms around. Okay. But the reasons he chose things,
man. Same question, Dr. Andrew. When you ran it through your AI model, did it come up with anything explaining why the water had played an important role in the reverse engineering of this craft?
I'm just looking at that now. I've got the superstructure or the frame of it, control systems. I'm going back to.
I mean, my understanding is it had to do with that thermonuclear system, and it used deuterium.
Where is it? That's the water. So the water was to generate the plasma. All right. So they were using a steam reaction to generate the plasma from a water steam plasma chain. So instead of say mercury, at 300 degrees Celsius, mercury can be a plasma. They're using water, but water's a lot higher than that to get a plasma. And that was my issue or concern, is that a containment field that's not just going to melt if you've got a plasma at 1,000 or 1,500 degrees, that's got to be some pretty serious tiled material compared to something like iron. Iron can contain a mercury plasma so much easier at low temperature. So yeah, it's a gas plasma pressure and enormous pressure too when you generate that, 2,000 atmospheres, I reckon, for charge density. So you're talking about solar conditions or sunlight conditions in a containment field inside a craft that's got a thermonuclear fusion drive. So it's pretty intense stuff for water vapor to become a plasma at that temperature. And then you have magnetic induction through driving a current through that as well. So the shell for that is where the issue is, because you've got to protect the solenoids around the disk from just melting from such a high temperature core. Whereas in our system, you don't get that, because it's driven, the energy acquisition is driven externally, and there may be a backup system, but not to that scale, because in our system, you're not talking about a thrust pushing through space and time. We're talking about phasing or jumping space and time.
Like skipping.
Skipping. So the material requirements in a craft are significantly less if you're drawing energy externally to feed the same vortex drive internally and then out through the craft. I mean, there's some similarities here. So let's talk about that. So the two models have similarities. They both say space isn't empty. There's an underlying medium or structure of space. It has a geometry to it. So we both talk about that, both sides. Field-based flight. So we're both talking about invisible fields to move. One more than the other one. They both have these field coupling properties. So we're avoiding the term anti-gravity. So they allow for hovering, vertical lift, inertia-defying maneuvers. Is questionable, because your document talks about 10 g of acceleration, which is still Newtonian physics. So I'm not so sure about inertia defying when the document discusses that. High speed, high control travel, yes, they both have that. So they both talk about sudden turns and sudden stops, rapid accelerations and direction changes that you see in UAP footage. Now, there was some issue in that document there about instantaneous, because if you're continuously accelerating at 10 g, you can't have an instantaneous. It'd be pretty sharp. You could probably turn pretty sharp, but if it's an acceleration at 10 g's, you can't, like a UFO, you can't just go like that. So that may be interpretation and documentation when it's translated as to what the craft is actually capable of doing. So that's a translation thing, and what they were trying to understand about these craft at the time. So there's a lot of similarities there, but it's just putting that kind of nuclear fusion drive into a craft like that and being able to contain and control the amount of gigawatts of energy it's going to produce to field the drive to be coupled with the orientation of the craft. So that's where it's at. But yeah, the water and steam is that's the plasma chain reaction for the fusion drive. But I think there's easier ways to do that nowadays with modern technology.
Yeah, and that's why I think these comparisons against, as we start finding the patterns in the government programs and the additional research, because part of my theory, Dr. Morgan, is that this body of work that we published is either what he privately retained or another draft version of whatever the final product was. So I always had the assumption this was part of a much larger body of work. Some of the papers in there are carbon copies, which means the originals went somewhere else, but he retained the carbon, but he also retained a lot of the originals. So maybe those were draft versions. But looking at how, the fingerprints in the science that's developed after, his period and going forward in these programs, those are the things that make me wonder, because we don't have any lab tests, we have this gap period between what would be laboratory tests and what would go into a pattern or a program, down the line. So, it's interesting to hear that and say, geez, you wonder, was it fixed somewhere down the line later on? Was it reconciled, in some other way?
Yeah, well, they're trying to put a power system inside there and couple it with, because once you get beyond the power system, the coupling with the craft becomes a lot more similar to what we're proposing. I mean, the materials science behind it might be different, because we're talking about in energy scapes. It's a very different approach to material science with using biomimetic membranes versus a structured metallic shell. But it's the power extraction. So you're still talking about magneto-hydrodynamics or turbine-driven coupling of that plasma, or the amount of power produced from the fusion drive of the plasma vortex. So you're still talking about spinning that up and getting those thousands and thousands of rotations per second to generate the current you need to feed the system and the solenoids to produce the lift and the propulsion. So there's still some similarities. It's just the way that power is utilized. Because in the craft, it's still thrust driven, but we're taking that power and spreading it across the membrane of the craft to decouple from inertia and skip through space and time rather than push through it. So there's some real good analogies there. It's just the pathways diverge from the power source. So internal power source versus externally powered, and then the field coupling is similar. But in your document, the field coupling is electromagnetic. In our research, the externally driven field coupling is scalar as well. And I think at the time when they were trying to understand how all this works, they've chucked in what they think would work in terms of known physics, because all this whole scalar field stuff was still under development, and maybe figured out fairly quickly if we get into scalar weapons technology as well. So like you said, in the Cold War era, anything that was potentially an advantage against the adversary was taken hold of pretty quick, and all this stuff probably got tied up in that, I would say, as well. And like you said, this could be part of a set of documents, especially post-World War II. And if you link that back with anyone that tried to go down that track with what they called anti-gravity at the time, with the Dr. Ning Lee and Douglas Torr and Otis Carr and Victor Schauberger, it's like, quick, get their work, take them or second to them or ruin their careers, or that sort of stuff, and then take all their work and then bury it in amongst all this stuff and carry on. So I mean, that's what I see happens, and this document just fits nicely into that whole Cold War narrative, if you know what I mean, trying to figure it all out.
I've got a question for you, Dr. Andrew, about the system as detailed in the blueprint of Jean's father-in-law. Is it feasible that there's emergent properties of the whole system that are maybe not detailed within that document? What I mean by emergent is effects unknown that could arise from the system itself, or so in emergence as a phenomena within systems, you have either a simple system or a complex system, but it begins to do things that you never originally created it to do or knew about. So is it feasible that with the fusion, it is a fusion reactor, right?
Yeah.
And there's a couple of pictures I want to bring in here from the World Fair of New York in 1964, where General Electric detailed and demonstrated working, I think, about a minute and a half, which is what we currently have, like in our news, a minute and a half working on fusion reactors. So basically, is it feasible if you have one which is stable, a stable fusion reactor, is it feasible that there are emergent properties when coupled with the solenoids and all the other gubbins gubbins, is that a word, or the other items within the blueprint UFO, can I call it the blueprint UFO we got here? Is it possible there's emergence of phenomena arising from this?
I think possibly yes, because if you're talking about because then we get into energetic field coupling. So if we move beyond EM field coupling, so if you've got a fusion generator generating that much power output in terms of electromagnetism, in terms of electromagnetism, we've still got the whole scalar field side of that too, as an emergent property of such an enormous amount of power. When we talk about fission and nuclear blasts and scalar field propagation, so if you've got a fusion reactor as well, then you would assume that there are similar emergent properties from concentrating that much amount of energy in fusion as well, let alone fission, that's going to penetrate interdimensionally in terms of scalar wave propagation alongside electromagnetic wave propagation. So you're talking about anomalous observational effects from doing that. The only issue I could see there again comes back to it's still a thrust-based propulsion system. I think if you were truly going to see emergent properties from that reaction drive, it's still critical is still how it's coupled to the craft in terms of utilizing the power for its propulsion mechanism to see emergent properties. You know what I mean? Like the 5 observables, for example. You still have to step outside space and time to see those properties as emergent. So you could have a fusion reactor in there, but if you're still coupling that to Newtonian-based propulsion, then you're less likely to see anomalous propagation of phenomena around that than if you were trying to couple to a scalar field, for example, like in our model, with an external layer on the craft, because then you are trying to orientate and skip space and time, and more likely to see the 5 observables, so instantaneous disappearing, reappearing, bending light, gravitational lensing and all that sort of stuff. So more along the lines of general relativity. So I think you could. I think it's totally dependent in the model on how that's coupled with the propulsion of it, rather not just the power source. So there's a lot of focus in the document on just generating enough power to be able to demonstrate, to do what they purport the craft can do and demonstrate that. So those emergent anomalous properties, I think you'd be limited in a demonstration model of that until you'd figured out properly how to couple with fields that are not just electromagnetic fields but scalar wave propagation, because I think that's where the anomalous observables come in as the 4-dimensional side of it, from vibration of atoms and the space between atoms and the scalar wave propagation, is that you need to couple with that, not just electromagnetic fields. You could get the hovering, but in terms of the zip, like that's gone and reappears, and then it cloaks itself and disappears, or it shimmers and bends the light around it. There's other physics going on there, I'm sure.
Is it feasible that you could have a mothership which has the superluminal transport system, like as kind of you're researching, and then contained within it are interplanetary, more atmospheric or interplanetary craft for observational? So you may or may not have seen the 1984 Lynch representation of the Dune film, where they.
Oh yes, yeah, I've
They've
seen that.
got,
Yeah,
you've got this classic cigar. It moves through space-time as detailed by something similar to your research. Once it reaches that location, the UFOs that we're looking at now with fusion reactors kind of plop out, and this is what we're seeing, orbs come out of these things, and then the cigar disappears. Is that a possibility?
yeah, because they're different technologies, aren't they? So if you had a craft that was a freighter, for a lack of a better word, that was superluminal, like a colonizing craft,
Bubble around
yeah,
it.
that would take, or even if you talk about shuttles, like in Star Trek or something like that, that you arrive at a planet and then you've got the shuttles going backward and forward. They don't need an interstellar drive system, do they? So they're going to have some sort of reactor system in there to handle the atmosphere of various planets without the
I do
burning
so,
up. Yeah, coming through. And
the kind of 90-degree turns, obviously pulling 10 Gs. We're looking at the physiology if they're manned.
Yeah, but that's control. I mean, that 10G acceleration, that's all controllable. So they're saying that's a maximum acceleration through space. A fighter pilot at 10 Gs, a lot of them pass out at that. So in terms of being an occupied vehicle, you're going down to a couple of Gs to have an occupant in a thrust-driven fusion drive that's got a disc shape. That's why I said it doesn't matter if in this design the disc doesn't matter. I don't think in this design, because it's not an interstellar engineering solution, so it can just look like Battlestar Galactica or something like that, going through our solar system from planet to planet in a relatively shorter period of time, sort of weeks and months from Mars to Jupiter or whatever. But if you're going across the galaxy, then that's not going to work. So that's when you go to the superluminal designs that we're talking about, with slipping through the fourth dimension in terms of space and time and hopping across it. So that I think they're both complementary solutions and to getting off the planet and moving between planets and then across the galaxy. And I've got here, in terms of control and movement architecture of engineering infinity. So you've got the reactor core. It's got vectoral thrust, right, through electromagnetic field modulation. So that's different to us. We're talking about scalar field modulation. So that there's that, and the vertical movement. Okay, so you've got vertical vectors. So that's dual layered field generation above and below the craft, like a bubble, an EM bubble, right? For lift, all right. But that's to overcome inertia vertically. Horizontal movement, though, is still an aerodynamic profile. So it's still the disc shape. I think for this reactor, the reason it's disc shape is more to do with field containment of a fusion reactor, right? Because of course you need to have the equally spaced containment field and solenoids around it, and thus the disc shape. But it's not an aerofoil, is it? It's still a disc. So it can hover and it can rapidly reorientate without conventional wings. So it's still got a field bubble steering system, but it's an electromagnetic one, driven by solenoids and an enormous amount of DC power, using known physics.
And I don't want to take up all the questions here, so I'm going to give the next question to Gene. I know you got a lot of questions for Dr. Andrew about this research. I mean, anything you want to ask him about it, or anything, maybe both of you could ask each other one question, Dr. Andrew.
I mean, I'm just thrilled I'm just taking this in. I mean, I've always been open to, I don't know what I don't know, right? I've always just said this is what I can make of it. So, this is I can't tell you how thrilled I am. I mean, it's just to feel like there are some answers that are coming out of it, just to feel like there is again, it's a little bit of self-validation in the sense, where I've tried to frame this up and say, look, this is a timestamp, right? This is both a historical Cold War and scientific timestamp. And so if we look at it from that way, what can we trace on both sides of this as being in a point of time? And so what I'm getting from this, is the idea that this path that we're on of trying to track the science and track the progress of it, tightening up the translations and extending, there is a there, as we say. The questions going through my mind are just really more about then how do we tie this to what we are able to find in the programs that are available? How do we, formulate this in a way to present to our representatives who say they are trying to get answers? How do we take this and point them in the direction to say, here's where you need to ask, and here's what you need to ask, and here's what you need to look for? Stop asking about UFOs, UAPs. Start asking about science. Start asking about these specific combinations of things that would only go together for achieving this type of purpose. So, I know there's no answer to it, but that's what's running through my head as I'm absorbing all of this is, just basically, how on the disclosure side, how do we move it forward? On the science side, certainly, and the folks at Falcon Space, and was just out visiting with them. There's little tidbits in there that folks seem to be finding, that they're not eureka moments, but they're like, oh, this is something to consider. So it's just phenomenal. Like I said, I have no questions. It's just absorbing it all.
I got you, Gene. So, Dr. Andrew, when you first looked at this, you looked through it, and what was your main take on this this book in general? Was it like, it was a what was your take on it? Just anything you have on your take on the book, and a question you might have for Gene on the book, like on the research.
Yeah, I'll point out some things here about my main take.
Sure.
I think my main take on the book was just the similarities and the differences with what we're trying to achieve. All right, because here's another document from that era, the 50s, 60s, Cold War, and I've read quite a few others that have called the fringe science and personalities that are not acknowledged in public science. Yet here's another document talking about this, trying to understand this technology and or disk technology and how it works. But the key takeaway from this document, again, it comes back to energy systems, right? Non-Newtonian, well, actually, it's not non-Newtonian, it is still Newtonian, but alternate energy systems in alternate airframes to achieve capabilities and capacities well beyond what was driving industry and the military at the times in terms of fossil fuel and combustion engines. So there's the economics of all this sitting in behind this. My main takeaway from this, and I want to keep to the science, right? Mm-hmm. Let's not get too philosophical here. Was the similarities and the differences. These are the key things that came out of this document, right? So in terms of engineering infinity, you had that it was a metal saucer, it was fusion powered, had the electromagnetic coils to push the craft, continuous acceleration, and classical physics with a little bit of modification. Now I line that up against our stuff, and this is the core take from this document, because it also gave us confidence as well that we're doing something that's been built on something else.
I was about to say, like, did those like concepts, did they line up or did they help you with your concepts too?
It's more like you were saying before about it's like a back validation to what we've come up with, that's built on previous work. So like we're standing on the shoulders of giants is what some people tell us, our team as well, because we've gone and said, well, instead of a heavy metal saucer frame, we have a light adaptive biomimetic membrane craft that can go superluminal. Instead of fusion powered, we've gone for resonance powered or scalar field coupled rather than EM field coupled.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of coils or solenoids for pushing the craft with the amount of current that you need, we've gone for our craft kind of surfing or phasing through plane layers of space. It's like skipping. So there is no push. It's just like, oh, we're there, oh, we're there. And then enough of those and you can jump across the galaxy. And then we've gone from your continuous acceleration into instantaneous repositioning through these planes. If space has a four-dimensional space has a geometry to it, then you can slip through it. And
so it sounds like the Engineering Infinity book itself was like the beginning to the major sciences that started coming out.
Yeah, I think these are foundational documents in trying to understand what this technology is and how to apply it using the known physics they had at the time and the vocabulary as well, because our vocabulary has evolved a lot. And that's why in our recent publications that we put out, the three publications we put out, boundary layer dynamics and field interactions in UAP, and signatures and resonant mobility in UAP, is going back through scientific literature in a number of different fields and looking for what we already know and going, hey, this language is already in other areas of physics with optics, optics and signatures and gravitational lensing when we look at in astronomy and that. And here's the 5 observables in UAP. And it's like, well, why aren't you taking the language that we already know and then putting it over here to say, well, that's what a UAP is doing. Yeah, but a UAP is not a black hole or a planet. Yeah, but it may not be, but it sure hell is giving us the same observables as a black hole or a mass curvature from bending light. So the vocabulary is there. It's just, I don't know whether it's education or what, or gatekeeping, or there's just this, we don't understand these things. It's like, yeah, you say that, but the more we look into the science, the more we say, well, the science is already there. It's just no one's looking at it. And is that on purpose? And then you've got historically all this work that's going on too that's been pushed aside into the dusty recesses of archives. Mm-hmm. And then you've got people saying, well, no, there's private sectors trying to build these things, and there's downcraft, and some of them are non-human, and some of them are human attempts at it. And then this document comes out, another document comes out like this that historically shows that they've been trying to figure this out for a long, long time. And here's another engineering plan using the knowledge that they had at the time. So you can go into what else have I got here? Craft, architecture, and materials. So if you look at your document, in terms of the geometry of the disc and saucer in the Engineering Infinity, they're up to 30 meters across, or 20, and that kind of matches the dimensions of narratives you see post World War II from declassified documents about the size of these saucers or what their diameter is. And then in here it says the Engineering Infinity, they had silicon alloys with diamagnetic insulators and aluminium alloys as high temperature solenoids. So that's using known technology, but you still have a very heavy craft. There's a lot of kit in that craft to get it off the ground.
I think it was the equivalent of like 16 fully loaded 747s.
Yes.
When I was trying to. But, and it was interesting because somebody else said, well, if it wasn't built here, if it was built somewhere else, then perhaps that is the right weight. You know,
Yeah.
I said, I don't know how all that works, but I'm okay with it. Well, let me ask Dr. Andrew, one of the other things I started, I looked at what I call the pacing and the pulse of the development of science, sort of, again, pre Chernobyl, my father-in-law, and post. Can you speak at all to the idea of the speed at which science is developed across these areas? Does the current pace as compared to previous periods say anything? Does it indicate, are we moving faster because we're smarter, or are we moving faster because we've been given a push? Is there any way to determine those kinds of things?
Yeah, I know what you mean there. A push externally to human civilization. It's a strange one, because if you go to antiquity and back to ancient history, you could say, well, we're nowhere near as intelligent as we used to be. If you regard ancient civilizations as having high technology that was destroyed, coveted, or disappeared, and then history was rewritten. So there's lots of conspiracy theories around that. But if you dig into it long enough, you start to think, well, the truths become a lie and the lies become truths. So in terms of being pushed, can you then say, well, the Earth's a very old place, and we've had a number of resets, and are we what's left of that? And if so, are there artifacts around the planet that have been secured, and going by what you see in the public, secured or locked away, or even like the Grand Canyon in the US, where you can't go, and people are saying, well, it's because there's Egyptian artifacts there. Those all those stories, or what's under the Giza Plateau, or what's under Antarctica, and then all the monolithic artifacts around the planet that all seem similar as well. So you start to go, well, what happened, and why are we where we are now? And in terms of, are we being pushed? I think if we've had societal collapses and had to become knowledgeable again, right, because we've lost knowledge, then when we discover stuff, you're saying, are we getting jump starts from that rather than just a slow progression? But there's two sides to that, because if you get into being an experiencer now, we talk about people having downloads of information and inventing stuff or coming up with stuff, and they're not trained in that field. I could take myself as an example of that as well. So you have a slow narrative of progression of science and technology, and then we have these jumps. Now, these jumps could come from recovered artifacts that are back engineered, that have been here thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of years and preserved. We could have an NHI presence that's been ongoing on this planet for a very, very, very long time, and things could be gifted to us or downed on purpose or just crashed as well. So, or just jumps in invention as well. Someone's invented something or solved something which has caused a leap in technology application. And I think you've got to be careful, though, because, I've got an academic background, but academia doesn't always solve things quickly, does it? Because it's a methodological process to building up a line of thought or a way of thinking, and then everyone comes in behind that person and they all self-reference, and it becomes a self-referential process that there's no quick solution. Whereas I can go, okay, I know enough now to give me a facility and we'll try and build some of this stuff. And that's not academia. Academia is, no, we need another 10 years to prove your concepts first. Right. So there's this dichotomy going on with the military industrial complex. Who'll go, here's an idea, okay, let's build it. And then academia will go, okay, here's an idea. Let's spend 10 years studying it, and then we'll publish a paper. So there's a real I think the two are trying to meet in the middle a bit more at the moment, because there's a bit of work going on in universities with a few key individuals about the phenomenology of UAP, and that to move forward quickly, we need to be more embracing of and more quick about how we respond as a society to all of this that's going on. Because if the private sector is already decades down the track with all this, because they don't care about publishing, right? Because that's not what their funding's based on. It's either, like you said, hidden budgets, hidden budgets, or billionaires going, "Here's $100 million, go and play." Right. That's a very different story. So I think we're in a dual situation where we've got spin-offs that are being held versus public sector science, which is trying to catch up. And it's the likes of us in our conversations that go and say, we need to catch up bloody quickly, or we're well and truly going to be left behind. So,
yeah. And I found, in a couple of conversations I've had, with academics, I find it, intellectually disingenuous sometimes. They're instantly dismissive of things like, oh, the weight and this, that's what. And, there's part of me that sits there and says, well, if we're exploring an issue of something that is potentially based upon NHI, doesn't it make sense that something that doesn't seem right might actually be the reason? It's like, if you expect the craft to land on the White House lawn and everybody's going to walk up with their Craftsman tool set and disassemble it and everything's going to be familiar, you're kind of walking into this, disingenuously. You should be expecting to be surprised. You should be expecting, if you're exploring NHI, to say, wow, this really doesn't fit what it is that we thought. But quite, I get those opposite reactions that, oh, it doesn't fit what I think, therefore, I dismiss it right away. When I've run into that with the academics, it's just sort of puzzles me, because I'm like, well, you should expect that you don't know. And they don't need to not expect it.
That's the perfect thing to actually go into the next topic with consciousness, with linked into this, because I was going to ask, like, we're now one for Gene, and then I'll leave the next one for George, for Dr. Andrew. Were you surprised, Gene, to find references to consciousness or behavioral cycles within this technical document looking at a UFO, and now you're looking at consciousness studies?
So, the first thing, and I would say it was even a driver before I started looking at the programs, was in the papers my father-in-law talked about, in 2024, 50% of society is going to, we're getting this download and we're moving through the Orion arm and all the rest of it. And, and it would be this stress between the oligarchy and the spiritual and the intellectual, forces coming into play. And then we got into 2024, as we're going through 2023, 2022 to onward. And, it was really the beginning of 2024 where I was like, you know what? This is eerily feels like what he's talking about. And I started hearing more of people who were really into spiritualism and consciousness studies and all of that, talking about these changes. And that, was probably the primary push where I'm like, you know what, we just need to publish this and put it out there, because that resonated really too close when he got into it. Now, I was certainly familiar with the Russian, history of cosmology or cosmicism and the noosphere. as they describe it, and it's always been, how they look at developing the whole person when it comes to arts and sciences and STEM and things like that. And it's why it's so ingrained in the society, and why I say, for every Dr. Andrew, I'm sure you met any Russian physicist, they're probably also a brilliant musician, or a dancer, or, something in the arts as well, right? Because to them, it goes hand in hand. And, when I look at, from the Intel side, these reports of, Chinese and Russian influences in American culture, however, they've maintained this consistently, then it began to make a little bit of sense to say, well, if consciousness, and as my father-in-law describes it, the ability to access this information energy field is part of human development, it kind of made sense that Russia and China, in trying to advance their own efforts along this line, would then do things to disrupt the American education and cultural fabric, let's say, and throw us down a different path. So I often try to summarize it as, it looked like, Russia very much stayed on this idea as was described in the documents when it came to consciousness and the development of the whole person, and Western analysts looked at it as just Russian mysticism and said, no, we can strong arm and engineer our way around it. And it seems in the last 5-10 years, based on what I've learned about, psionics, and you look at even as far back as the Stargate program, what has been done in the U.S., what I think about and wonder is, has the U.S. realized we can't engineer our way around this, and now they're trying to play catch up? And that's why now things like psionics, and there's so much more discussion around that and acceptance of it, both in the academic side and in the government side, that they're like, yeah, we're 40, 50 years behind in this area because we were just trying to engineer in America, strong arm our way through it.
That's very much along the lines of what we're thinking about consciousness utilization in these craft as well, because you're moving from a traditional airframe control system and combustion reaction to the whole craft being the engine, right? If you take the step further from your design to our design, where it's totally externally driven process and the whole craft is a resonant cage, for example, then the operator has to be able to talk to that system, but there's no control system, right? So what's the interface between thought and craft? And that's where this whole psionics comes in of, you engineering interfaces have to take thought and put it into action within the craft, which is the engine, because it doesn't have a traditional engine. So you can't just have an accelerator and and all the other devices that go with it. So you've got to have that mind link to the craft and become the craft in a sense as an operator, and feel what it's doing, so you can tell it where to go and what to do. So that requires a change in thought or consciousness to be in a non-physical state of mind. Especially, we talked about this in my previous interview, especially if you're jumping space and time and the disorientation, because you're going from here across the galaxy in sort of hours or a few days and popping out, and then a couple of days later you come back down here to your house and you've been gone a week and you've gone to Alpha Centauri and back. What does that do to the human mind? How do you prepare for that compared to a thrust-based system where you say, well, I'm going to Jupiter and it's going to take a few months, but I'll just be on a craft that's accelerating continuously. That's acceptable because it's in your physical reality.
Mhm.
But if you're going to do what we're talking about, deep space interstellar transits like the Star Treks of the world, what's the training for that? And I know, and what's the operator interface in terms of consciousness? Because you're going into a craft interface that's in a resonant field state, right? And you're steering it with intent, which requires navigation as well. So how does all that work? You still need a map, otherwise you just get lost somewhere in the galaxy and you can't get home again. So there's got to be a map as well. So in terms of civilization, yeah, we're reaching a stage now where we're saying, well, just engineering alone is not the solution. There's chemistry, biology, physics, and engineering all coalescing together into being able to have a craft that is able to do this. And we talked about the difference between an operator and a passenger in another conversation too. It's one thing to be an operator, but what if you're a passenger jumping across the galaxy in terms of consciousness and disorientation, and the ontology of all that as well. So there's a state of mind that has to evolve and change here. And I think it's, like you said, more to do with spirituality and reaching or ascending to a certain stage as a civilization to become part of a spacefaring race, without the fear mongering and everything else that goes with it. And because we're very good at killing each other, and we're very good at the physical aspects of reality. But that's not very useful when you're out in deep space in the middle of nowhere, going across the galaxy, and you bump into another civilization, because the two don't line up, because you can't orientate and run a craft at that level and still have that mindset. You know what I mean? It just wouldn't work. I just cannot see how you could be in that state of mind and operate that type of craft, because you're not in coherence with the craft, because you still have a fear-based mindset of everything, like everything around you, right? Because you just want everything to be the same and nothing to change. So when something pops out, or you're in something that pops out somewhere, your instant response is fear, and then fear is anger, aggression, war, and violence. So I think we're teetering on that now with all the disharmony around the world, and wars are carrying on. To be honest, it's a kind of a weird situation, because a certain part of society is becoming less and less interested in who's doing what war where, and more saying, well, where am I going and where are we heading? And they can all go and kill each other. I don't care anymore. Just go and wipe each other out, and then we don't have to deal with it. That's kind of, it's a horrible thing that what goes on. It's like me at the moment. So we'll just go and blow each other up so we can all get on with it. That's a lot of people say like that. They just don't care, because we want to be peaceful and become a spacefaring race. So if you all kill each other, then that you're all done and dusted, and then we can just move on. You know what I mean?
And that's what I took out of that part of the work, right? Because he talks about the rise and falls of civilizations and empires in the U.S. and he puts it into this framework that this is what happens, and this is the cycle, and these are the periods that these cycles rise in, and it is just and so when we look at like 2024, what he talks about in 2024 and what you described, Dr. Andrews, is right, exactly that. You got half of society who's like, the hell with it, go do whatever, we need to move on. And everybody else, no, let's, that's in essence what he's describing. And that this is going to be the continuous cycle until, we, is it, do we call it survival of the fittest? Is that, is that the order of nature, that over time, the warmongering breeds of humans just die out through attrition, and then we're in this state of everybody who is more universal, more tied in consciously to the universal energy fields, and we start really being able to communicate and feel these vibrations and operate, within the the resonance. And that's what, and it's in there too, in parts about how, even as people, we resonate, with one another. And so that's why I tell my wife all the time. I said, that's why, maybe you just come across somebody and you're like, I do not like them, because those vibrations are off. You can go back to the 60s and the hippies. Are we feeling the vibe, right? Maybe there's something there.
Yeah,
George, you got a question?
I've just like the whole last 5-7 minutes. I've been sitting here trying to figure out like a Venn diagram, where you get a circle, and I'm working on it. I've got kind of science and academia with reality of nature in the middle, and then the phenomena, and I'm trying to like see what the overlap is, because I've always believed that asking questions is the fundamental basis of understanding. If you're asking big questions, good. If you're asking, and it may take several smaller questions to get there, but it's also, if you can formulate a good question, you're almost there with the solution, if you can really formulate it well. And on the kind of like topic of consciousness and so many keywords keep on cropping up. Is intention measurable? From scientifically, if somebody's like really focused, you can say, okay, that person's focused. But can you sit there with a clipboard and a detector going, that's real intention? It does thought itself. When you think about things, does it have? We know you can put an EEG skull cap on and we can measure brain waves, but does it have a weight to it? Is like a thought form weight. Does perception have a gravity? These kind of things coming out. And I think kind of where traditionally the topic of UAP and associated phenomena, because it doesn't just necessarily stop there. There's many people in different arenas on that side of the phenomena, looking at kind of extra dimensional, ultra test, like all these things. And I'm sitting there kind of going, well, if it's my father had an experience, he never reported it in the logbook of his boat when he was in the Pacific, right? He was a ship's master. He had an experience. He told me about it. His first mate had woken him up. He'd seen something. He used to identifying boats as clear Pacific day, and he said, I didn't put it in the logbook because I'd have had to have explained it, and then I'd have been ridiculed. But I think now, kind of science, not that I am a scientist, but I feel that science is beginning to ask questions outside of its usual bubble, and individuals like Dr. Morgan here and individuals like Gene here who are bringing to light more questions. So referring back to what I was saying, kind of having the ability to ask questions without stigmatism, without ridicule, is the basis of moving the knowledge base forwards. Kind of question-wise, after all of that, we've got one to Dr. Andrew here about consciousness, magnetism, and the human effects. Okay. Could future physics bridge the gap between consciousness and then field interactions?
Yeah, definitely so, because they talk about med beds and all that sort of stuff too, with and resonance and sound healing technologies, and that's all tied in with consciousness as well. And technologically, we're also at the stage now where people are starting to say, well, the mind, the consciousness is not an emergent property of the brain or the mind as it develops. Consciousness actually comes first and sits outside of that, of the physical dimension. So your higher self, right? So consciousness or connecting with your higher self is part of an energy field, and we all have a measurable electromagnetic energy field, right? But they're saying when you hook up to someone who's in a coherent state that has a focus or intent, that they can measure the expansion of that electromagnetic field off a person as well. And we're still not talking about scalar fields either at the moment, with the technology to measure that as well. We're just talking about electromagnetism, and because we are our own pyramid, all right? We are our own dynamo. We are our own toroid with our positive and negative. So we generate our own electromagnetic field by default with being alive. So you're saying, well, can consciousness have an effect on that? And some studies, I think, are starting to show, a little bit of reading coming out now, and more so about consciousness studies and the impact that has on reality and intent, because they're saying, well, if you think hard enough, you can manifest things. And they talk about psionics and summoning UAP and having a measurable reaction to a certain state of mind. And you can go back to MK Ultra and all those other Cold War era experiments and remote viewing that seems to suggest scientifically that, yes, this all works, that with intent and focus. So I can be in the room of a Russian scientist over in over in Russia somewhere, and I can kind of make out what they're doing. So that's intent, and that's focus, and that's consciousness, and bilocation or remote viewing. So there's been studies of lots of subjects showing or demonstrating that this can happen, or it does happen. And some of these people that have been in these programs are saying now, well, no, anyone can do it. You don't have to be a specialist ESP person or some gifted ability. You can be trained to be like that and to become aware of your higher self and your extrasensory perception. But that also implies that you can manipulate your own reality, because most people walk around us every day subject to everyone else's reality. Okay, you're just a reflection of everyone else around you. They can't actually see who you are. And when you walk around, you're just reflecting what you see in other people, which is not who you are. That's just the character you play. So you're asleep. But when you become aware of consciousness and state of mind, and you start to have an intent and say, well, this is all false. This is not where I want to be. This is not my reality. This is a construct that everyone else has put me in, and the simulation, if you want to call it. And then you go, okay, well, who am I and what do I really want to do? And it's like, okay, me 7 years ago, I'm starting to wake up to the fact that I've had anomalous experiences all my life. Okay, what am I going to do with that? I'm going to figure out how UAPs work. And that's my intent. So my intent for 7 years has been to build a interstellar spacecraft. Okay, so that's my intent. So if that's your intent and you don't deviate from it, you still enjoy life, but you don't deviate from it. You get synchronicities start to happen. You get downloads of information. You get more and more encounters that drive you. And any road that becomes another pathway is blocked. And you might go, oh, why did that happen? I'm so sick of that. I thought I was going to do that. And in hindsight, you go back and go, oh, if I went down that road, none of this would have happened. Or if I went down that road, none of this would have happened. And you go, and these might be trauma experiences or trauma in your life or something like that. And you go, all roads are blocked. Okay, so for 20 years, all these roads are blocked to get where I am now. And what's my intent now? And you go, oh, that's how it works. The only reason I'm here now with the intent and focus I have in it is because of all that shit that happened before.
Yeah.
That's becoming aware of your consciousness taking over control of your reality and building it for you, rather than just walking through life amongst everyone else's reality and never knowing who you are. I'm waffling.
No. I think you're right. Like maybe consciousness is writ into the universe, and the universe is conscious, and we have consciousness, so we can be aware of it at the same time, like two mirrors looking at each other. Maybe that kind of thing.
But that's how you drive a craft. That's how these craft work. I'm sure, is that's the state of mind you have to be in an interstellar craft as an operator, let alone a passenger, so that you can navigate the cosmos. Because you can't do it if you just are in a construct, subject to everyone else's reality. Because you're just a programmed person. It's like these damn mobile phones at the moment with the apps on them with algorithms destroying the minds of our youth. Because all they get fed is algorithms for what they want to see, and their worldview goes like this. And so they're not going to participate in all of this sooner or later, because their minds are going to be destroyed to the point of just being robots that respond to what everyone else wants them to do and be. And that's what's happening.
That brings up a good point, Dr. Andrew, with a series that came out, The Foundation. Okay, it's called The Foundation, where they found this giant ship, and they're going to the navigation. They got to find the navigator in the ship, and it's a human being that is actually hooked up, like directly connected their mind into the ship to make it the navigation, right? Is that kind of where we're going now with Neuralink when it comes to Elon Musk and his brainwave technology connecting into a system, right? Is that kind of, are we hardwiring more, or are we going, that route?
I saw that, and then there was another science fiction miniseries that came out about a craft. A crew was invited on board, and they figured out that the previous owner had uploaded themselves into the craft, and they were a grumpy old lady.
could Neuralink be that, like, that coupler kind of to the system?
I think that's a very hardwired solution, because
it would be hardwired, but it would be a slower version of consciousness, because you have to use something to assist the connection.
Yeah, this would be like the Bluetooth version.
Yeah.
Is that and I can always envisage is that it's a hand on, I haven't figured this, it's not in my head yet, but a hand on a device which feels the field of the craft as it moves and manipulates, and that sensory perception is connected to a device on your temple that can turn thought into action, so that if you feel the
simultaneous
action. Yes, you want to go to Mars, and we've got energetic nodes in 4-dimensional space or hyperspace here, and here to jump to Mars. And you can sense that in the craft, because the craft feels space and time through the technology, and then as long as you have a map, right, in your neural interface, because we still need a map, then you just focus your intent and say, execute transit to Mars, and all you do is you see in the map Mars, and just the thought of we're going to Mars, and then the craft initiates the jump sequence, and then you go, and that's it. That's how I see it. So it's Are
we going to go the hardwired route first, though, or are we going to go?
I think some of this is being done in the military already.
Through this one step down from that, through the holographic helmets.
And the fighter pilots, there are systems now that they tie into the biometric data that they're getting in the flight suits, and whatever that hundredth of milliseconds of difference between when you see something and your brain processes it, it's trying to fill that gap so that the craft responds to the stimuli before the pilot consciously processes it.
Yeah, so you take modern fighter pilot suit and helmet technology now, and instead of an airframe with a combustion engine, you just put them inside a field craft where the whole craft is the engine, so there's nothing installed in there, and the control systems are minimal It's just a hand on the craft,
Mhm.
all right, and the rest is the helmet and the interface, and that's all there is. So that's kind of the next step, is because you're moving away from combustion-based airframes into field-driven airframes, whether or not they've got a reactor in them or they're externally driven, like the one I'm suggesting. There's still that other coupling technology there with the field, all right, to tell it where to go.
Which then begs the question, where and when did they originally, what's the origins of the progression of that science? When was moment X that they said, oh, hold on, we can merge the biology of the pilot with the technology of the craft in some way,
Well, it's interesting because Otis Carr's work talks about that. He talks about having designed a disc-shaped craft and then going inside it. I don't know if he trialed it, but this was the design that just the thought of where they wanted it to be. It could make it hop across just our planet, from one place to another instantaneously just by thinking about it, and that comes out in some of. There's a declassified FBI file which I got hold of on how they ruined Otis Carr's career and prosecuted him for fraud for the company he built. And I think he went to prison for that. And he was never the same person when he came out after that, and all his work disappeared. There's a whole FBI file on that whole process that's declassified now. But he was into that, the disc-shaped design with the solenoids and all that. But the actual control and navigation of it was the neural somatic interface. So that was decades ago as well. So sort of similar Cold War era.
They also had one with, if I'm not mistaken, it was around the 2000s, early 2000s. They had a University of Florida that took a mouse brain and sliced it. It was already deceased, but sliced it into little bits and had a thin layer across a component, electrical component, and they taught it how to fly an F-16. And it actually, the computer chip was biological and organic with the neurons of a mouse's brain, but they were able to teach this chip to fly this plane better than the pilots.
True.
And that was in the 2000s.
Your brain sliced.
It was, yeah, 2000s.
So your main issue is where's these leaps in pilot helmet suit technology coming from? Is it back engineered? Is it dropped into civilian or military research institutes to say, here, have a play with this, see what you can do with it, and which look at Corso's Roswell story as well about all that with drip feeding technology into the aerospace industry to see what they could do with it in terms of superconductors and other things. So for these leaps in technology that we keep accelerating up and up and up with faster and faster, and then we've got AI now as well, making it even faster. So where is it all heading, and what is the origin? Well, we can only speculate, but I think it's more what's the solution to all this now for mainstream science and society to catch up with what the military industrial complex has been doing for decades for various reasons. And I talked about in my previous podcast interviews about we need to move on from retribution into having a conversation like First Nations do with truth telling and reconciliation, and all being on the same page and saying it's okay, we want to understand, so let us in. We're not interested in executing people and punishing people and putting people in jail. We want sort of an amnesty and say, right, okay, the last 80 years, this and this has happened and this has been going on, and we didn't want to do this and this because of X, Y, and Z. And so, okay, well, that's all. That's the past. What can we learn from that? And we want to be in on it, and we're ready. And enough of us are sensible enough to help the rest not panic.
Right.
and because I think that's where it's at, where there's enough people in the world, the likes of us and everyone, I think the Bible calls it the 144,000, and there's various other ascension stories and that about enough of the population being in a state of mind to help everyone else. And that's the whole, the biblical narrative side of Revelation and Apocalypse, or truth telling, you might want to call it that as well. So we're at the sharp end now, and I think it's going to accelerate pretty quickly in the next few years. And just this book is just another cog in the wheel for the whole background. And what the problem is, people don't know the story, and unless you do the research to try and understand the story, the 80 years of the story, all you end up with is fear and anger and finger pointing. And so, well, no, you're just ignorant of what's been going on, because there's so many different things. This is just a massive, massive story of humanity that's been hidden, and you need to talk to all the people involved, read books, watch what's going on, understand ancient history as well, religion, understand science, consciousness, spirituality, technology, the military, government, wars. It's an education, I think, more than anything now. This is an educational process to get people up to where they need to be to understand what's actually going on.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
I've got a question for Gene. Gene, what do you think, the future looks like? Because I know you were never really in this topic until you got the documentation through, right? And you've been kind of thrown into it, hey, get in the pool and like good luck.
Drinking through a fire hose.
Yeah. So
actually, George, you raise a good point, because I just looked at the calendar. So today marks 181 days that I've been engaged in the subject.
Okay. Coming from your career into this arena and topic, and looking at I don't know, how would I word this? Looking at the technology that we've grown up with in civilian life, maybe technology from your previous military career, technology from other areas potentially. Where do you feel the technology will go? Do you think it's kind of a convergent point, like with the, standing back and looking at biotech and, computer technology, quantum systems, AI, quantum AI, holography, all of these things that marvelous. Where do you feel the future lies with technology? I mean, where do you think we're going to be? These somebody in the side chat mentioned the classic film. Definitely recommend it. Firefox, Clint Eastwood. Yeah. I mean, with the helmet, being able to think in Russian or think in your these kind of. Is this the next interface? And does that ultimately lead in a consumer environment to spam? Right.
I mean, I'll always say it. I'm a bit of a stoic, so I just sit back and say whatever the experience is, and I will, learn from the experience, good, bad, or indifferent, and try to not even label it that. All of those things, of course, you can see happening, right? It's all on the horizon. This just might be the old man in me talking now. There's that part of me that says, when you can put on a helmet, or even you can hold your cell phone and you can instantly translate conversations, yeah, that's great. But we lose something, right? So some of those things to me reflects losing some of our humanity. In a sense, because we are handing it over, and we are robbing ourselves of the education process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not to say the education process doesn't mean something over the next decade, and I'm just being old-fashioned, with the ideas of picking up the book and doing the work and investing, investing yourself and your time into doing something to better yourself, to me, is more human than having a piece of technology that now suddenly does it for me. That learning a language is about not just learning words and vocabulary and grammar, but it is about somewhat embedding yourself in a different culture, or a different time period, or and learning more about your fellow human than you're going to get from just being able to sit there and have the conversation. So, I know a lot of, as I say, I have less years ahead of me than I have behind me. And so whatever it is that's come out of it, and there's the old adage, right? The old men plant trees that the shade of which they'll never enjoy. That's kind of where I'm at, with this, in so much as this dropped in my lap, our laps as a family. We felt the responsibility to humanity to put it out there and say whatever it is that this might be, whatever somebody can do from this, or whether it is just a marker in time, then then so be it. I don't have any expectations I'm ever going to see anything that comes out of it down the road, but I've planted the seed and it's there. So, I have no doubts, but yeah, there's that part of me. And again, just the old man thing, or getting up there, midlife thing, that it's kind of sad, in a sense.
Do you think the United States government has a roadmap for this? Is this yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Right. And that's why I think, again, my perception and experience, particularly over the last 6 months, has been that this body of work, can throw a wrench if it picks up steam, if it picks up momentum, if we have, more people like Dr. Andrew who take it and say, well, hold on, yeah, this looks like there was something there. It raises uncomfortable questions for the government as these pieces are being put together. It throws wrenches into the timeline narrative that they might have wanted to have. It throws wrenches into the relationships between nations over the last 80 years and how this has progressed. And, I talk a lot about the brain drain of the 90s and how I think some of what's not only in these papers, but in other bodies of work that came out of the Soviet Union that landed in the, U.S. defense industrial complex, how that has changed and altered the course of history in a lot of ways. So it's, it's amazing to feel like you've contributed something to this, or inserted something in the conversation that can even cause that kind of disruption, in a sense.
It's a ripple in history.
Yeah. It's all I can do with it. I'm like I say, I now play a physicist on TV, it seems, and in a lot of ways in trying to figure this out. But listen, it's exciting. It's exciting to think about, especially a student of history myself, and love, all of that, and particularly the unknowns. But, I think the bottom line is that it's sort of shameful. It's sort of a shameful history if we did have access to all of this, and, the first instinct was to weaponize it and not improve the day-to-day kitchen table lives of everybody everywhere. And as Dr. Andrew said, how do we reconcile and write it now going forward, if that's what we're able to do?
Now, Dr. Andrew, if you had to guess, Was Gene's father-in-law ahead of his time, or working from something that he encountered?
That's an interesting one. Let's see. If this is back in the 50s, wasn't it? 50s and 60s.
80s. Yeah, so it's the 80s. So I've had, it's and I've had. I think I've told Jay. Somebody said to me that so he was either a prophet or he reverse engineered something.
That's what I'm asking. What do you think, Dr. Andrew? It ahead of his time or working from something that he encountered?
Could I if it was like me, I'd have to be both, because to be ahead of your time, you have to have access to something that you're not an expert in, but you seem to have an intuitive knowledge of, and then you've got to have, you've got to be ahead of your time as well. Just in terms of your understanding of physics and engineering, I suppose.
Because he was supposed to be a plumber, and then I look at these notes and I'm like, this is not a plumber.
No, that's right. So where has that understanding come from to put together such a document? And if he saw something and had an encounter and saw something, to get the knowledge to do something you're not an expert in, and to any extent at all. I mean, I can say I've got a PhD and I have an understanding of the research process, but I'm not a specialist physicist. But I am a generalist, and I have 30 years in science, and I can kind of put 2 and 2 together and get 4 a lot of the time if I do enough research. But if you put encounters in there and interactions with a phenomenon, and something's happened, and that's opened doors that you would never have walked through otherwise, and your whole worldview changes, then a person like him all of a sudden writes a book on something he's not an expert in, but he seems to understand what he's doing. That's
well, he
where
does it. Yeah, not to to frame it correctly. He graduated, from one of the USSR's top aerospace engineering programs.
Yeah.
So, that was, so the plumber thing was just what he told his daughter that he did.
Well, there you go. So so you're ahead of your time. Well, put it this way, you're ahead of your time enough to know that if you see something that is anomalous or an encounter and has the wow factor, and you know what to do with it, all right, and you've got enough experience and background knowledge and credibility within industry at that stage in your career to write a book on something you think mechanically has this engineering solution that has an encounter behind it, then that's that's where I see it as well, because it's kind of parallels a little bit my story as well. Is that 7 years ago I started down this path, and I'd already been in science well over 20 years, and in the military and academia and industry and oil and gas. And so it's not like Joe Bloggs is telling you how to build an interstellar craft. It's a 30-year career scientist who's an experiencer with a track record of high credibility, like coming out with Avi Loeb and Gary Nolan and all the other guys now that are coming out. These are all career intelligence, military and science professionals going down the same track and saying, no, there's something to this. It's all real. It's all been covered up, and we're going to do something about it. So back then in the 80s, here's another person who's come out, at the time of, Dr. Ning Lee was around then, Otis Carr before then. That's towards the end of his career. Then after coming afoul of the FBI, and here's another document in that era, looking at the same sort of stuff and trying to figure it all out. So I see a person like him as being ahead of his time in his field of expertise, having an anomalous experience, and then deciding to do something like what I'm doing, work out an engineering pathway to a solution to it, and going, well, and like, because everyone else is going, okay, well, we're just going to observe the phenomenon, we're going to record it, we're going to record different types of UAP and what they do and how they move, and it's like, eventually I got so sick of that and said, well, so what? We could do that for the next 20 years. I mean, I really don't care anymore. Someone tell me how to build the damn things. That's what I want to know.
George, you got a question?
No, hey, I just wanted to, well, I think we're getting close to wrapping on this.
Yeah,
one.
I was going to say.
So, no more questions from me, but just to say thank you so much, Gene, and thank you so much, Dr. Andrew, for coming in today. I know we're kind of like Gene's up incredibly early. Dr. Andrew's on his way. We've really crossed some international days today to bring it together for everyone.
So I just wanted to say the last question for both of you would be, Dr. Andrew, when I got a hold of you and I said I might have a historical blueprint for you to look at, what was your feelings on that? And Gene would be, what has this journey taught you about secrecy, technology, and legacy? And either one of you can go first.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah, I'll go. Historical blueprint. So that tweaked my interest straight away, because I've got a book coming out next year on forbidden science, which looks at that whole journey about these craft and their design and engineering and coveted technology and all that sort of stuff. So when you said that, and I'd done a lot of research on some of these key figures, and I hadn't come across this one either. So that's when I thought, oh, this is going to be really interesting. I'm looking forward to this, because I want to compare it to the work that we're doing, to see if it validates or cross-references some of the stuff we're doing. And to a great extent, it has corroborated in a very good way in terms of comparing and contrasting where we're heading, and we'll keep going down that track. So I was really pleased to be able to do the analysis on that book compared to our work. So thanks for the opportunity. It's been brilliant.
Oh, you're welcome, Dr. Andrew. And Gene, what was the journey? What has this journey taught you about secrecy, technology, and legacy?
Well, I already, again, my past life, in Intel and in oil and gas. And Dr. Andrew, I was actually out in Perth for 4 months. I used to go up to Carafa, mess around up there in the Northwest Territories. Listen, I already, my whole life, professional life before this, was based on secrecy and technology, just different theater, just in the oil and gas, energy security field. So, I call it the apparatus that was at work there is exactly the same as what I've found, over the last 6 months, embedding myself here in what I now call the UAP industrial complex, and how, all of those interests overlap. It's, same structure, same thing. I'm a little bit of a one for a fight for justice, and that's what I'm trying to do here now. Best I can.
Great stuff.
That's awesome. So if now in the future, we'll connect you guys together, LinkedIn, whatever we need to keep you guys talking, because I've also talked to, well, I'd like to talk to Danny from Falcon Labs. I've been trying to get over there myself, actually, Gene, because I'm interested in the laser character DMT kind of thing experiment he's doing with the characters. But I'll get over there at New Jersey eventually, but to meet Danny, but at Falcon Labs. But that'd be another person, that we could, link up together. You, Gene, Dr. Andrew, Danny from Falcon Labs, all of you together. Danny, I think, is working on propulsion techniques and other stuff that he's working there at the labs. Like, you guys getting together and collaborating would make the UFO.
There's a
Don't
thought.
say that out loud. They might try to stop that. They start saying plane tickets being bought.
First publicly available UFO.
Yeah. First publicly available, commercially available UFO, like the
Book your
Jetsons.
trip to Mars now, 2 hours there and back.
Yeah, like the Jetsons. But I want to keep this going. Like, I want to collaborate with you guys, get you guys together in a space and just let you guys go at it, because that's what this is all about in the galactic family. We're bringing people together so that we can get to the core history, the core science of everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So if any of you have, either one of you have any final thoughts, we'll...
No, just thank you very much, guys. Enjoyed it. Appreciate it, Dr. Andrew.
Yeah, likewise, Gene. It's been awesome.
All right. Thank you, guys. And we now also have the membership is now open. I just got that finally figured out. It's $1 a month. You'll support helping us grow and to shine a light, our galactic light, into the shadows, just like we're doing here. We bridge people together, like Dr. Andrew and Gene. We make the science possible. All right, between these two, and that's what we're going to keep doing. George, final thoughts, and then we'll end it.
See you next time. I think in a few days, hopefully we've got an interview with Danielle Silverman, I think it is. That's going to be quite interesting. We've got some things in the works that I can't reveal about spring coming up, which could be like a real scoop for us, actually. But I'm not releasing that information. My life's not worth it at this point. But just to reiterate, thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Morgan and Mr. Gene Sticco. Thank you very much. And regards to everyone who's tuned in today or will tune in later. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
And, we'll leave Gene's book up here for the last couple seconds here. This is Engineering Infinity, Earth's first interstellar blueprint. If you'd like to purchase it, we'll have that also in the description, as well as Dr. Andrew's hyperlinks to his NGRscapes lab and his research papers. So thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you had a great evening and a great day wherever you are in the world. And we'll be doing this again very shortly. Have a great afternoon, morning, night, everything, guys. Have a great galaxy day.